and it doesn't work. And then others, they invest little time or no time in planning, and they find themselves on this pathway to insanity. They're doing the same thing over and over again, and they're not developing any kind of advantage in their marketplace. So as I go through this and talk about what makes a retreat work and the things that you may want to do with it, a couple of notes. I would highly recommend keeping a pencil and paper handy, because I'm going to ask you to make some notes on a couple of things. Also, if you have questions, you can type them into the question box on the right. And periodically I'll check that, or I'll come back at one of the question points and see if you have a question. You can also raise your hand, and if your hand is raised, I can unmute you, and you can ask a question then. As I said, this call is being recorded, so you can also go back and listen to it in the future. So one of my favorite books is Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And he uses this line, get everyone on the bus going in the same direction. And he uses the metaphor in the book consistently. But so I'm a fan of retreats for a number of reasons, but one reason is what he's talking about here. A retreat is an opportunity to get your partners, your team, everybody on the same bus going in the same direction, pursuing the same objectives. And it really can give you an advantage when you do it. By the way, if you haven't read his book, he's got one of my favorite opening lines, and I've probably said this to some of you before. You might write it down. He's got one of my favorite opening lines in the book, and it goes like this. The enemy of great is good. And what he means by that, I'll say that again, the enemy of great is good. And what he means by that is we get doing good enough and we stop pursuing excellence. And sometimes that happens with us in the law firm. Everybody gets doing okay, we get comfortable, and we don't go for excellence. And one of those things that we have to do to find excellence in our firms is we have to start doing retreats. So there are a lot of law firms resist, and you probably have tried to plan them or you've done them before and you've got resistance inside the firm. And clearly it's inconvenient to do a retreat, and it's probably a distraction for many of us because there's a lot of things going on. If you're a litigator, there's trials going on. If you're a transactional practice, you've got stress, deadlines to meet, you've got staff issues, a lot of stuff that get in the way. But doing this really separates you from the pack. And when I discuss the subject of retreats for either planning or training, and we'll talk about the different purposes in a moment, I hear partners saying things like this. And by the way, you may have said something like this yourself, but they say things like, I've tried this before, nothing ever came of it, we talk, we argue, we carry on, nothing ever seems to happen, it's the same issues every year, it's waste of time, why bother? If you're getting these kind of complaints from your retreats, it's because there's something off in the approach, because they definitely work, they can be done very powerfully for your firm, but something's off. And what I'd like to do is talk about 7 common mistakes that law firms fall victim to when they're doing retreat. The first one is they think about it, they talk about it, but it never makes it on the calendar. And I know it sounds simplistic, but if you don't get the retreat scheduled on the calendar sometime 3 months, 2 months out in advance, we just don't organize around it. People they don't put it on their calendar, and it never happens. We lose focus at the retreat, and it could be because it's not facilitated. So somebody monopolizes the conversation, or someone takes it off track. One of the questions, I might write this down. One of the questions we like to ask before a retreat is almost we call it a past-based question. So it goes like this. I want you to imagine that we've finished the retreat. It's all done. We've spent a full day working on the firm, planning things out, and it's all done. And it's the end of the day. And you're looking back and you're saying to yourself, well, let me rephrase that. you finished the day, it was a great success, it was very, very powerful, it was the best thing you've done for the firm. And so my question is, what 3 things would have to happen at the retreat for it to be that kind of success? And you want to ask that kind of question, almost past tense. It's like when the retreat, if the retreat was very successful, what 3 things would have to have happened for it to be a successful retreat? And that tells you, gives you a lot of information. It tells you what the focus needs to be, where we need to stay on focus during the retreat. So it's a powerful question to ask. What 3 things would have to happen for this to be the most powerful retreat we've ever done? The other mistake, the third mistake, is we don't include the right team members, or sometimes we include too many. So it's a good thing to talk through. Sometimes you're doing a high-level strategic conversation and you just want partners, or you want yourself and some key people there. But sometimes you're doing a little bit more, setting a direction for the firm, doing operational actions, and so there's certain people that you want to include. And I do go to some firms that they include the whole team into this planning segment. And I'm not opposed to that at all, because the more voices you have, the more people that are owning the plan, the more successful you're going to be. The other reason, the fourth reason that people fail at these retreats is they have way too many goals. They come into it with way too many goals, they leave with too many objectives, and people get lost. There's no momentum out of that. The fifth reason is there's nothing powerful or memorable about the objectives. The objectives should be fairly simple, fairly limited. You don't need a lot of them. And they should be things that people can connect to, they can remember. Objectives that say, okay, for example, one objective is we're going to increase our average fee per file by 20% over the next 12 months. We are going to upgrade our technology and move to a cloud-based operating system. So we'll go into action items later, but there's got to be things that people can connect to. The sixth reason is the plan is way too long and way too vague. There's nothing specific about it. There's nothing immeasurable. There's no way to get us to do number 7, hold ourselves accountable to it. And so that's the seventh thing. The reason that a lot of these retreats fail is there's no accountability. There's no implementation. Everybody goes to retreat. It could be a great retreat, but there's no follow-through on it. And so next year, when you want to do something, check in, you want to get some progress reports, nobody wants to do it because nobody saw any value out of doing it the first time because nothing happened. We didn't get any results. So those are the 7 reasons most retreats fail. And so we want to talk about what makes them work. And so the first thing we have to think about are, there's a series of things that we would do. First up is schedule a retreat. If it's a strategic retreat, so we're thinking about the strategies that we're going to use next year or the next 3 to 5 years, I'd recommend August, September, October, or November as planning dates. Those are good dates for retreat, and for me, August or September is the best, because let's assume we create a plan for 2015 or the next year. We're going to have time to work through it, think about it, correct it, and budget to it. And so that's a lot to have happen and get things in gear so you kick off in January with your plan. So get it on the calendar is the first thing. And if it's, sometimes people will use these retreats for a getaway for key firm members, for either partners, or sometimes they'll do include associates. Sometimes they'll want to go to a vacation resort, which is okay. Just make sure we know why we're there. If it's recreation, it's not about the retreat. If we're there to focus hard on the issues of the firm and then recreate, then probably do it over 2 days. Do it in the morning till about noon on the first day. Let everybody hang out in the afternoon. Same thing on day 2. Or if it's just a work retreat, go there. Try not to go to a vacation site because you'll have a lot of distractions. The next thing is decide on the intent of your retreat. Are we doing, is the retreat to get our strategic focus in line? Is it a marketing retreat? Is it just focused? You could focus on any one issues or combination of issues. But is it marketing? Do we need to get aligned in what needs to happen the next year in marketing? Or do we need a specific retreat to address compensation issues, succession issues in the firm, or is it a training retreat where we're working on productivity issues? So those are a couple of things that you could have a combination, or you could have a sole focus around training or development issues. And then decide on whether it needs to be facilitated or not. So here's the thing about self-facilitation. If it's a fairly simple, small facilitation, small group, and you want to do it yourself and you've got a good sense of it, that's okay. I'm a big fan of using a facilitator because sometimes if you're trying to do it yourself, you don't get to really engage in the conversations. You're too busy thinking about the agenda, keeping it on focus. The other reason you might want a facilitator is, number one, most facilitators that you're going to get are professional, have done it before, and they can keep you on track, and they can also gently bring those people that try to monopolize the conversation back into line. So usually, for most of you, you're going to want a facilitator. And you can usually, obviously, if you're connected with Atticus, there's lots of people at Atticus, lots of coaches that can facilitate retreats, but you might be able to find someone in your community as well. And then you want to research and gather information for the retreat. So you don't want to go into the retreat cold. There's things you're going to be working on, and there's some research that needs to be done. It might be, you might need to make sure you're bringing financials with you. You might need past performance. You might need your staffing issues that you've had. You might need to do a survey of your team, of their biggest frustrations, their biggest concerns, so that they can be pulled into the retreat, those sort of things. So there's usually a little bit of information and research gathering. So after you've scheduled it, you've decided on the intent, there's sort of an ideal way to approach a retreat, and then there's sort of a more realistic approach for your retreat. The first thought is don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. At the retreat, you may want to discuss trends in the marketplace if it's strategic in nature. So obviously if you were doing a training, you don't have to do this. But if it's a strategic planning retreat, making sure we understand our goals, where we're going, direction, those sort of things. You might want to discuss some trends. What are the market opportunities out there? What are the threats? This is the SWOT analysis. So you might look at strengths that we have at the firm, weaknesses that we have at the firm, opportunities that we have, and threats. And so that's really a segment in a retreat in and of itself sometimes. You can do the SWOT analysis, and we talk about each of those. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, if it's the first, let me rephrase that, not again, but if you're doing the retreat for the first time and it's strategic in nature, we've found it valuable to get clear on core values and operating principles for the organization. I'll spend in a moment, I'll go into these, but for me it's like your constitution. It helps guides decision making. We'll talk about those in a minute. In the retreat, and I mentioned this in the last slide, you want to understand the frustrations for your team, your partners, your operational people. As a leader, one of your jobs is to set direction, hire the right people, give them that direction, and get out of the way. And so one of the things when you collect these frustrations, it can tell us what's in the way, what are the things that are getting in the way of our team accomplishing their mission. And I would, at the retreat, probably limit to 5 strategic objectives that are measurable and forward the organization. And out of those objectives, keep SMART action items. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but if we're just looking at the current year, we want very specific, measurable, accountable, realistic, timelined action steps. So SMART is an acronym for keeping them simple, measurable, keeping them accountable, making sure they're realistic and timelined. So those are some of the things. So we want to make sure we have action steps from the strategic objectives. So I mentioned mission and vision. This is always confusing people, but I would only do this if it's your first retreat. And it's something that you should ask yourself either way. But we're looking at the really big picture and getting clear on the purpose of the firm. Why do we do what we're doing? What do we see for the growth of the firm? What does that look like if we described it? What would it look like over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What are some of the promises that we have to the community about the work that we do? Some of this gets to the why of your law firm and helping you describe what you do at the heart of what you do for people. So you have to dig into that a little bit. You have to sort of see or visually think about what the organization is going to look like in the future, describe that. And then you can jump into core values. So for me, these are the principles, and when they're properly defined, they should be our firm's constitution, our guiding principles. And when Jim Collins says, get the right people on the bus, well, we have to be able to describe the bus to people that they're getting on. There's lots of organizations they could work for, but what defines you? Why should I come work for you? Why should I get on your bus? Or if I'm on the bus, what are our guiding principles? And so some firms dig into this a little bit, and they usually leave that first one off, by the way, profitability. But they'll say one of our guiding principles is honesty, integrity, ethical behavior, professionalism, competency, or excellence in the work we do, basic fairness in our dealings. We have a client-centered perspective here. We have a systems perspective here. So you have to define each one of those for people. But why I like core values or operating principles, when you're confronted with something in the organization and you're not sure where to look on making the decision, you come back to your core values, your operating principle, because they help guide you in that decision. So around client-centered, if you're doing something and you have a question about a piece of work and how we're doing it, we ask, is this in the best interest of the client? If it's not, then there's another consideration, or we have to be throwing that idea out. If we've got people working in the firm and they're not building or following systems, we have to question that, because we don't want an organization of customs. And what I mean by a custom is that sometimes you have a paralegal that does great work but has a lot of processes, but when they leave, so leaves that process. And so we haven't systemized it. We've got a custom. And customs mean we're personality dependent and not systems dependent. And so when you're asking about workflow and how things should happen in documentation, it's got to be systemized, if that's one of your core values. And if we're doing something, even though we're client-centered, we've got to be focused. If our profitability is an operating principle, how is this going to make us a profit? How is this going to make our money? And you'll be shocked at how many firms don't have profitability as an understanding as one of their core operating systems. So each of those core values, if you did this exercise, not everybody's going to do that, but it has to be broken down, and sometimes they're explained like this. We believe that taking care of our client is our driving value. We cannot do that unless we remain financially healthy and profitable. All members of our team contribute to the profitability of our firm. So if I'm joining your organization, one of the things that I want to be familiar with is this operating principle, and that we have to not only do a great job of giving the client value and take care of them, we've got to make things profitable. And so when you're looking at an initiative or another practice area or something else, you've got to come back to the core value and say, is it part of our strategic future? Let's go to the next one. Let's see if it goes to the next one. You can do it. Basic fairness is another guiding principle that some people have. We are committed to basic fairness in our dealings with each other and clients. We will continue to endeavor to always do the right thing. And so this is the idea is when they're this principle, when they're dealing with staff or attorneys or clients, they're trying to make sure that they're going overboard, in this case, to be fair with the person. And if it's not fair for them, then it's not working out very well. So they try to, that's one of their basic principles in this. Competency was another one. We are committed to the quality and competency of our team and excellence in our work product. We will never be embarrassed by our representation or presentation. So this was actually from a firm that had an experience of someone embarrassing them, and they said never again. And they want people to understand when they come into here, competency is one of our core values. You continue to develop that. You continue to work through excellence. So that's just a description of some of the things that people do with their core values. We also said that you should have 4 or 5 strategic objectives, no more than 4 or 5, when you leave your retreat. And these are the kind of objectives or categories of objectives that people have. You might write these down. I'm a big fan of having revenue and profitability objectives. Some people will have objectives around marketing efforts, firm governance, succession planning, development of partners, associates, and staff, firm technology, collections, and compensation. So again, I'm not saying every retreat should have each of these, but you should have strategic objectives, and they usually will follow under these categories. Now, you could do a retreat around any one of these categories if you chose to, but a strategic retreat is going to be taking on what we need to be doing in the next 3 to 5 years around revenue and profit. And by the way, if you haven't heard it from Atticus before, we should be looking at a minimum of a 35% profit margin on the firm. And that's a signal of a healthy firm. And by the way, that number does not include shareholder salary. So that's above shareholder salary is the 35% profit. So if we're doing a strategic objective, I recommend we talk about things like we'll increase our revenue by 20%, we'll ensure a 35% profit margin, and then there'll be action items underneath that to make sure that that's happening. Firm governance, we're setting up, one of the things we need to do is hire an office manager or a new managing partner. We need a structure there in place. We need to build a succession plan for partner A. They're 66 years old. They're holding a good chunk of business, and we need to have a transition succession plan for them. So you get the idea. What has to happen. Each of those would have action items. So in each of those categories, what 3 things would your firm, well, actually, at your couple of questions you can ask for the retreat is, what 3 things should our firm focus on in the next 3 to 5 years? What are the 3 most important things we could be doing next year? What's the one thing that the firm could do to improve overall firm productivity and profitability? So those are good questions when you're at the retreat? What 3 things could we focus on over the next 3 to 5 years out of those categories? What are the 3 most important things we could be doing in 2015 or next year, depending on when you do this? And you could change these questions around. What's the one thing that the firm could do to improve our technology over the next year? In this case, they said productivity and profitability. So those are great questions to ask. And so after you have defined some of your strategic objectives, you want to build action items that forward those strategic objectives. And so when I think about the actions, I tend to think about 12-month focus, an annual focus. We probably don't want to go too much more than that around the basic action items. What are we going to do in the next 12 months? So we might have looked 3 to 5 years out. I don't recommend when you're doing your strategic objectives you go any further than that because there's so much changes in the marketplace. So 3 to 5 years, usually we tend to look 3 years out. And then given that's where we're going in the next 3 to 5 years, what do we need to have happen this year, in the next 12 months? And these goals are where we talked about the SMART. They should be specific, measurable, accountable. Somebody's got to be accountable for them. They have to be realistic. They can't be crazy. And they have to be timelined. If you're including a lot of your team members, so operational people, paralegals, clerical people, I would be thinking about goals in the area of continuous improvement. There's a book that we have some of our clients read in some of the higher level programs on Kaizen, which is small improvements over time, constant small improvements, and get people thinking about that. It's a very easy thing for them to adapt. If you try to do very, very big goals for your staff, sometimes it freaks them out because they're so busy it's hard to them to imagine how they're going to get all of it done. So keeping things moving forward with small improvements on a regular basis is a good idea. Once you've got your action items put into a measurable, specific, accountable framework, you've got to have some document that tracks them. So you could create an Excel spreadsheet. We use something called a strategic roadmap that does that, where it plans out the action items and breaks them down. And then you want to keep that plan, and you're going to be looking at that on a regular basis. And then you want to budget to the plan. So you're going to talk to your financial team, your bookkeeper, or you're going to have someone work on that with you. And you're going to figure out what's the revenue that we're going to generate, and what are the costs to generating that revenue, given what we said was going to happen. So some of your plans are going to need, money. They're going to be an investment to make sure that they happen. So once you've got your action plan together, you've got to make sure we're implementing. And this is where we make our biggest mistakes. People are very good at the retreat, but they run out of commitment stamina. They're all committed at the retreat, but a quarter down the line, 2 quarters, 9 months down the line, they've lost their stamina for getting things done. So you've got to maintain that energy around these things. And one thing that you want to do, once you've done an annual retreat and you've got goals ahead of you for the year, you want to stop every quarter and take account. Where are we? What needs to happen? What works? What's working? What adjustments do we need to make? What was a plan? What was a goal that's no longer a goal? So don't try to redo the whole plan. Just look at the plan, adjust the plan, acknowledge what's working. This is actually a very, very important point. If you do a quarterly session with your team, excuse me 1 minute. If you do a quarterly session with your team, look for the wins that they had. One of the things that creates stamina, that helps them stay with the goals, is they get some momentum. They see things that are working. So to do that, spend some time acknowledging what were the wins this last quarter, what worked. If you're continually focused on what didn't work, then it's going to be a nightmare. People are not going to be excited about it. They're not going to get any momentum, and they're going to fall to the wayside. So look at it quarterly, adjust it quarterly, and acknowledge the wins. If possible, use some outside accountability. So some of the firms that we do retreats with will have a call once a quarter with the practice advisor to go over accountability and work through it. Because a lot of us don't like the accountability. We don't want to be, if we're not doing well with something, we don't want it held up in our face. But it's one of those things when a firm can find a way to hold itself accountable and hold each other, the team members can hold each other accountable, the progress is unlimited. They can do amazing things. And so when it comes to accountability, there's a great quote that says, very few people achieve positive, lasting change without ongoing follow-up. Unless they know at the end of the day that someone is going to measure if they're doing what they promised to do, most people fall prey to inertia. They continue to do what they were doing. They don't change behavior, and as a result, they don't become more effective. So I would say getting some level of accountability, whether you hold each other to it or you get someone outside of the organization to do it, you're going to struggle with this. And this is just a very, very important element of it. So when we talk about the retreat, first thing is, if we want to make it work, first thing is you get it on the calendar. Second thing is decide on the intent and the focus. We're giving you lots of ideas about strategic focus, the kind of things that you can do, and making sure that we're keeping the strategic focus fairly limited. We want to look out 3 to 5 years, not much more than that. We want to make sure that we have measurable objectives that are memorable. We want action items that are very specific, measurable, accountable, realistic, timelined. And then we want to put some accountability into getting it implemented. And you need to have 12 months the next year's growth in mind. So it's great that we can think 3 to 5 years out, but it's next year, and it's the first quarter, and it's tomorrow that we have to make things happen on this game plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up to questions. And what you're going to want to do for questions is you can either raise your hand, and you're allowed to do that on the control panel. It has your name on the control panel and gives you a place you can raise your hand, and I can try to unmute you. Or you could type it in to questions. There's a question element there, and I think there is a question here. On the last slide, what was the timetable to do the one thing after the retreat? So I'll have to go back and see what slide you were talking about. On the last slide, what was the, I'm reading one of the questions someone submitted. On the last slide, what was the timetable to do the one thing after the retreat? Oh, I'm sorry. So one thing after the retreat, the timetable? Well, for me, it's within the first week, there's something we can do to forward the action, whether it's to get someone to document the retreat. The first thing you're going to want to do is write down what came out of the retreat. What were the actions that came out of the retreat? What was the strategic focus? And we're not going to commit to them fully just yet at the retreat. We want to review them, look at them, first have them typed up, review, and make sure that it's exactly what we wanted to, and then we commit to it. And then the first thing will be to make sure someone is accountable for each of the objectives. And then you go to work on them. So let me see, if you do have a question, you can put it on the question in the question box, or I'll check and see if there's things. So I see a question here by Jeffrey. Is there a particular Excel template for tracking the progress? There isn't a specific one. It's not very difficult to create. I know that we probably somewhere deep in our systems have a Excel template, but it usually has the written specific goal and who's accountable for it. And another way to do that, if you don't do it on an Excel spreadsheet, is you could put it on what we call a strategic pathway. And the strategic pathway says, first we say, what's the goal? And then in the next box, we say, why is this goal important? And that's a great thing to put there, because our clients sometimes forget why they pick this as a goal. So why is this goal important? And then we say, what are the action steps that have to make this goal happen? And is there any revenue or expense associated with this? And who's accountable for it? And then on the strategic pathway, we also have what's the next action that has to happen. And so we lay out all of our strategic objectives going out that way. And we'll see if we can post something as a sample of that. Scott Hendler asked the question, hi Scott, where does the 35% figure, profitability above shareholder salaries, come from? How is that calculated? So this is not the calculation that you're going to take to your CPA. This is sort of a separate calculation. You're going to listen to your CPA when it comes to how to handle the finances in the firm. But once from the revenue, we're going to first have the revenue, then we're going to take away expenses. In those expenses, so you're going to have your rent, you're going to have your marketing, you're going to have your salaries and wages. So you can have all of those expenses there. And you're going to have a shareholder salary. And usually we calculate that at Atticus. So if it's Scott or it's the shareholder in the law firm, what would we have to pay someone in your marketplace to replace you for substantive activities? Not for marketing, not for managing the firm, not for the other owner roles, but what would we have to pay someone to replace you as a substantive attorney? And so we'd post that. Say it's $200,000, $300,000. That would be the salary that we would assign to the shareholder. Beyond those expenses, when we subtract all of those expenses from the gross revenue, we should be able to see at a minimum a 35% profitability. So in a litigation firm, that can shift wildly, because some years you're going to have, you might have a big case settle. But typically you're looking for 35%. It's almost like if a person was to take your heart rate, if you went to the doctor and he took your heart rate, your blood pressure, he did all your biometrics, he could tell your basic health. At Atticus, when we look at your practice, and if we see 35%, that tells us it's a fairly healthy firm, where 35% of the revenue is going to the shareholder to pay them for the risk and for all of the work they put in to creating the firm. It's the return on their investment at a minimum. Some people will do that better, get a higher profit margin. The difficulty is even if you calculate it, you may reinvest some of those profits back in the firm. So you may have to invest in an advertising campaign in Scott's case, or you may have to advertise in more, invest in more people, or you may have to invest in more space. But every time we make another investment in the firm, just so we know, that's coming out of the shareholder's pocket. So that's how it's calculated. And Scott, if I see you next week at the Dominate Your Market program, we can talk about that. There's a question here. Being obsessed with the profitability equation, you have mentioned it. In analyzing the 35% goal, are we not supposed to factor in equity owner salaries, but all other staff? I think we answered that. I want the equity owner salaries in the cost. Let's see. Some of the profitability numbers, I think one of the things that we probably should do is one of these practice development series. We've done a number of them. They're recorded on how to understand profitability, how to identify it, and how to drive to it. The key is, if you're doing a retreat, make sure profitability is part of the retreat. I don't care, you know, Atticus can show you how to measure it from our perspective, but as long as we're working towards it, it's part of our strategic objectives, that's what we need to do. But clearly there's a lot of questions about it. People want to know more about it. And Susan will do that as one of our retreats. She can actually send you, if you want a link on it, there's another webinar that we have. You can go to the website and you can dig through that. There's a question here. What are your recommendations for associate-only retreats? I'm not exactly sure what you mean about what's the recommendation for that, but if it is an associate-only retreat, what we're usually going to be doing is we want to make sure they understand the shareholders, the equity owners' direction. We want to make sure they understand where we're taking the firm, why we're taking the firm in that direction, their part in bringing the firm to our goals. Then we want to work on, at a retreat for associates, usually associate development, improving their skills. Usually it's their competency skills or their interactive, how they interact with clients. We may want to do work on their communication skills. A lot of times we'll come into firms and we'll do DISC behavioral profiles on associates and have a conversation about how they communicate and how they can improve their communication. Sometimes you can do work on leadership with associates. That can be very valuable as well. So you can build a retreat easily. There's a lot of things to work on with associates. Let me see. I think there's a few other questions here. Someone's asking, can we get a copy of these slides? Yes. This call is being recorded. There'll be a PDF of these slides uploaded with the recording, and you can get those. And I'll see if there are other questions here. You can just, if you have one, just type them into the question slide. I'm reading down. Okay, good. So right now I'm not seeing another question. Let me just check and see if there's a hand raised, because that's sometimes you do that and I can unmute you. And I don't see a hand raised. Okay, good. So a couple of things about retreats. I'll just finish this up and make a recommendation on something. Susan wasn't on the call this morning, wasn't able to talk on the call. But a couple of things coming up. There's a practice builder coming up October 17th and 18th. If you haven't done a practice builder, it's probably one of the most important foundational programs you can do. It's really a boot camp for how do we run this firm? How do we do the time management, the marketing, the staffing, the cash flow? How do we pull them together in systems? How do we work on the firm? How do we break out of this technician mode and into a practice growth stage with our practice? Also, some of you may be interested in doing a retreat and you want to find out about a facilitator. One of the things you could do is contact Denise Gomez. Denise's email is on the screen, denise@atticusonline.com. So those are a couple of things you can do. If you're interested in more work on profitability, just reply an email to Susan and she can either get you a webinar that we've done on it, and I think we'll do another live webinar just on understanding, calculating profitability in the law firm. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close. If I missed getting a question from you and you want to ask me ask me directly, my email is mark, M-A-R-K, at atticusonline.com. Okay, you guys did great. I wish these things were a little bit more interactive, and so you got to jump in with your questions live. We'll have to figure out how to do that better. But we're going to go ahead and conclude this call, and I appreciate your time, and I hope this is a helpful program for you. Good day.